You're listening to a Bamsters podcast. Go listen to something else.
And welcome back, everybody. Yes, it's another episode of the Bamsters Show, the Rated R.
Yay!
It is the first week of October. It's episode 89. And that voice you heard in the background, that was Grit Breather.
Hello, I am here breathing grit again. Back from a long hiatus, but somebody has to step in for Bam. So today we have what we're going to be talking about in a moment, which should be quite interesting. And then we have Draconis and his regular comic shop talk section, with some things I don't completely remember, but I do know he's talking about My Little Pony, which could be interesting.
Oh yeah, he and TJ are back, as usual. I should say apologies. As Gris mentioned, we've had a slight incident. We're a little bit late this week. We hope you'll bear with us. But we have an episode at least. We're going to look at a couple of Kickstarters. We're going to look at a game that already kickstarted. And then Grit and I might just have an opinion on Star Trek.
We always have opinions about Star Trek.
Yeah, but they might not be good. Well, they might not be bad either. But they're opinions and they're ours, and we're proud of them.
Yeah, well, at least we don't have to be ranting about that non-Star Trek universe this time.
Yeah, that's part of where I have an opinion. But hey, before we get into that, the Kickstarters, should we take a quick look at them?
Yeah, I must admit I don't know much about them, so let's talk about them. Go on.
Okay, so this is going to be a little bit one-sided. Well, the first one, I have no idea how to pronounce this. It's by some... If I'm not mistaken, the lead developer is Russian. The guy behind the game is Russian, but he's living in Berlin. Neorj? No idea, really.
Yeah, just looking at the name written down, I could go with that. Neorj, maybe. That was slightly French, but yeah.
Yeah, I can't Slavic a way that works with that name. That just doesn't work. But I'm sure there's a correct way, and I know what we've chased the guy. Told him to come on the show and tell us about this because it looks really nice. It's a little 3D platformer, run around platform style, but more free running. And it's set in these fantastical, gorgeous worlds with a lot of colors and a lot of vibrancy in the background and in the whole setting. Where you play as Heli. Again, no idea how it's supposed to be. If it's Germanic, Heli. A girl with magical powers, and she has this little sidekick of a dragon. And you run around solving puzzles, dealing with magic, and growing your abilities. It's fairly straightforward, but there's this RPG element in it.
Okay, well, it sounded pretty standard so far.
Yeah, it isn't that it's particularly exceptional, but as I said, it looks really nice. One of the mechanics they kind of like to highlight is that the magical powers you have are, you summon things that will attack for you, or you use it for defense.
Okay.
When using your abilities, you can then combine them, and they say there isn't a set path of combinations with your abilities or spells, but you can throw different ones down and create extra effects, and that's kind of where the game then lets you explore a little bit and find out what works for you, which spell, which abilities should you combine to get those effects.
That sort of reminds me of a game called Magicka. I think it was Magicka 2 or something. Played it a while ago on the PlayStation. It's not a platformer, it's more of a top-down game, but sounds fairly similar. You walk around with magic and stuff, keep learning different spells, and you can combine effects in different ways. Sounds fairly similar.
Oh yeah, I wouldn't say dissimilar from Magicka. You got a point there, yes. One thing I also liked was they talk about how you can find a toy bear, a stuffed bear, a little Paddington, and you can turn it into an actual bear. So you find toys in these fantastical worlds and use them to defend yourself, use them to fight for you.
Interesting. Well, as I'm sure the trailer for the game or some sort of video is playing behind us, it must look nice.
Damn it, now you're giving me a challenge. Now I have to go look for that. But yeah, they're actually only asking for 15,000 euros, which is fairly, limited in terms of games. A lot of games are asking for a lot more, some getting a lot more. And one of the pledge levels that I kind of find interesting, one of those that I like, you can get a hand-painted figurine, 20 centimeters tall. That's 8-inch in backwater measurements. But it's at the €500 pledge level. Oh, That's a little bit more than I would want to pay.
Well, modern slavery does cost more than old-time slavery. Somebody has to hand paint them.
I've seen hand-painted figurines for other games that have been in the 100, 150, 200 euros or $200 range. 500 seems like a lot. You get other things as well. It's just this one isn't available until that point. So I'm going to say they're not going to sell a lot of those, but I hope they sell enough of them to actually get the game made, because as I said, it's a nice little thing. And just that it doesn't become too expensive, because if they have to hand paint 3 of them, ooh, that's going to cost a little bit extra.
Yeah, well, I'm sure they'll be fine. But you were saying about the 15,000 being fairly low. That's interesting, because we went through a phase of some Kickstarters that went pretty high with requests. I think that was mostly shadowed by things like Star Citizen, which was just insane, where you had a very small studio or a couple of indies just trying to get a fairly large amount of money to make a game. But that's sort of dying out now. I'm seeing more and more Kickstarters for one-man shows that are outputting fairly impressive stuff, and they're not asking for a lot of money at all. They're basically asking for money for food for a few months.
Yeah, at one point it really was, between 100 to 250,000 euro a dollar. That's not the case anymore. There's still some that are getting up there, but now it's a lot more, 8, 10, 12,000. A few are hitting 20, 25,000. And it's for food. It's for ensuring that a developer doesn't have to have a second job while doing this development, so they can take some time off and work on it.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, the few I've seen in the past not so long, couple of months, they look quite impressive. They look like things that I wouldn't even think a studio of 10, 15 people could output at the same time.
Yeah, as at Neorj, there's a main developer, there's a few more people involved, but it is primarily that developer, and I think there's a graphics artist that are also supposedly working full-time, and then they pull in people as they need them. So it's not a big team, and it looks really nice. I'm really digging the visual styles in this game. Just to round up the Kickstarter, it will run until November 9th, so people have a little time still. And there's a demo available for Windows, so if you want to, you can, try the game out beforehand.
It's just another game that's once again putting you Mac guys out in the rain.
A little bit, but this one might come out on other platforms once it's released, but the demos, they're almost always just Windows only. It's the same with the next one, Freeman Star Edge. This might be more of your alley. Space exploration, flying around and finding things, but with the little niggle that you are not doing the flying. You're flying in a Mass Effect style, you're looking at the top of the map thing, but when you're on the ground, it's first person, you can run around, and they want to have space combat as well. So for the navigation, it's still just fly over there, tell your ship where to go, but when you have space combat, there will be actual third person flying, shooting.
That's an interesting combination of elements.
Yeah, I think part of it is just to avoid the whole headaches of how do you get from A to B, and how boring is it to fly Super Cruise and Elite Dangerous.
Yeah, what you just described sort of reminds me of one of the Heroes games from a few years ago. I only ever played one of them. I know there are a bunch in the series, Heroes of Might and Magic or something like that, where you sort of walked around the map in a fairly basic top-down view, but once you encountered an enemy, it was all sort of a zoomed-in view where you had more options in the combat itself.
Oh yeah, that's been a staple in those, and they ripped that off from another game that I now cannot remember, but I used to love a lot. Warlock, I think it was. But this one, the style is very much, and I really mean very much, Mass Effect-y when you're flying around, until the combat part, and the running around on the ground is very Skyrim-y, but science fiction-y. They're going for that Skyrim, sneak around, steal things, trade things, explore things, solve puzzles, solve quests. But
I'm looking at one of your notes for this, and you say run around on the ground, but then you also say 1,300 square meters?
Yeah, that's... so there'll be multiple planets, and you can land on each of them, and I think it was 800 to 1300 square meters areas. So they're not huge, but they're not that small.
No, I wouldn't say they're too big either.
No, size is a thing, but it's again a game right now. There's a graphics artist, there's a developer, there's a community manager, and that's it. So it's a really small team, so I can imagine they're interested in keeping things small.
Yeah, but I just hope they manage to release, because the team you're describing, which is sort of dynamic and has people jumping in and out based on the requirements of the development at the time, it reminds me a lot of another game we reviewed ages ago, Angels Falls First, which is really nice and really ambitious. And they had a dynamic team as well, where they just hired people and then on sort of a project level base for whatever they needed at the time. But that game, I don't think it's been properly released. Could have been just very recently. But they've been developing it since, I don't know, at least 10, 12 years ago. So I hope this goes a bit faster.
I see where you're getting at, and it is a headache, and it is a problem with a lot of these games, that there is a burnout element, there is also the element of how long does work actually take. The ambitions with Freeman StarTrek, they will have to grow their team. I cannot imagine them doing this alone, because it is a small team, and the ambitions are big. But they kind of handled this, on for these guys at least, with stretch goals that goes up to $500,000. So their goal is $80,000. As we mentioned, that's a little bit more than most games these days. But they can go up to $500,000 with stretch goals, which is where they hit multiplayer. And that would allow them to bring in more people, one should expect. Not just one-off, but people who will work full-time on the game.
Yeah, well, if you properly manage these things, then they can go on properly and last for quite a while. But then you also see a load of these games and projects and startups where the management, and especially budget management, is really bad. So I wish them the best of luck.
Oh, definitely. I don't want to be negative with these guys. Is that it's optimistic, but it's doable. The budget seems reasonable. 80,000 is a lot to ask these days, but if you have the game that can carry it, it is still doable. There are still games that are getting, past the 100,000 mark easily. But it is a single-player game. It's non-story driven. It's a sandbox game where you can build settlements, you can go around stealing things, you can go around fighting, you can control little teams, you can land on planets, you can fly and fight in space. Yeah.
Does it have the recent magic word in gaming? Is it procedural?
It doesn't look to be procedural. So there's a lot of manual work in making this game.
Okay, that's interesting. That means more designed places to land.
Yeah, but again, navigation is done on a high level, so you don't say land precisely here. You just land in that area.
Still works. If it's fun to play, then it's fun to play.
Yeah, it looks fun enough, and right now they're streaming pretty much every single day. Their community manager, Tina Kirsti, I'm not sure her last name, is pretty much on Twitch every single day showing off the game and showing us the build progresses throughout this Kickstarter period. As I said, it's 80,000, the stretch goals goes up to 500,000, and it will run until November 2nd. And yes, there is an alpha build available. It is pretty early, but it's also Windows only, so I haven't tried it.
Well, then all I can say basically is people in a gender-neutral way. Go look at it, download if you want, contribute if you can, and let's hope it comes out nicely.
Yes, but talking about, we're still in space and space games. I think there's one that you backed a while back.
Yes, this is no longer on Kickstarter, even though they sort of picked up a little bit of the Star Citizen model, where they are continuing to get funds after the Kickstarter. Dual Universe, obviously sticking with our space exploration and building stuff, bit of RPG. It's an interesting game, Dual Universe. I know you've been following it a bit less than I have. So just for the benefit of our listeners, if they haven't been following, it's an extremely ambitious project. Only unlike some other ambitious project that I've already named too many times today, this one looks like it's actually going to happen. Think about Minecraft, but more than Minecraft, where you can build any shape, not just cubes, in a probably close to infinite universe when it'll launch. You can build anything, ships, bases, you can go mine planets, make discoveries. It's sort of EVE Online if EVE Online were completely player-built. Even things like massive space trading stations where players come to trade their stuff, buy ships, sell ships, bring in goods, slaves, exotic dancers, anything you'd have in such games. Those would be player built as well. Apparently, the universe itself is not going to provide any framework to start with. The players are going to be doing everything.
Would it be fair to say that this is EVE Online meets Space Engineers?
It's more than Space Engineers, but yes, sort of. It's going to be a massive MMO. The story of the game is that players wake up on an old, half-crashed, half-landed colony seeding ship, and there's sort of a protected area around that ship where they can go explore, do anything they want without worrying about other players hunting them. But they can also leave that area as fast as they want, go out and make a name for themselves.
Seems a bit rote, but okay.
It's very ambitious. I think one of their biggest ambitions, and I hope this works out, is that they are aiming for a gamer community which is not as toxic as EVE's. Problem is there are a lot of EVE players who are planning on moving to Dual Universe as well, so it might become a very cutthroat universe.
Well, the simple question becomes, are they planning on taking the same hands-off, everything goes up until a hardline kind of approach? Because that's what EVE Online is famous for. You can be an a-hole in the game as long as you keep it in the game.
It'll probably be about the same, but I think their community guidelines are far from final yet. They're basically letting the current community sort of form itself and show them what kind of guidelines they need to put in place.
Okay, so this was on Kickstarter. Say they're still kind of wanting money. What's new? What's happening since we're bringing these guys up?
Well, yeah, that's a very good question. I probably should have mentioned this to start with. The reason this is suddenly coming up again is because they have, on the 30th of September, which will be a few days ago when this episode goes live, they launched their pre-alpha to gold backers on Kickstarter. Now, this is a slight change to the original plan. They were only planning on launching an alpha, which would be open and streamable and everything. The pre-alpha is slightly less of a game than the alpha. In their words, the game loop isn't complete, which, to my understanding, just means they don't have all of the career pathways completely fleshed out yet. You might start doing things and hit a wall. The game is stable, according to what they say, but they are getting all of the people who have access to the pre-alpha to sign NDAs, which means we won't be seeing any streams out of it, we won't be seeing any screenshots, and information will be extremely scarce. But it is a pre-alpha, and people are playing it as we speak, which is a wonderful step for a game to make.
Will they release before Star Citizen?
I think I will retire before Star Citizen.
Fair enough. Don't have anything to say to that one.
Yes, but don't think I'm negative or anything. I'm not negative, I just don't think it has any chance in hell of going live. Star Citizen, that is.
I'm not explicitly disagreeing with you. And I think seeing a game like Dual Universe, it's an interesting take on a game. It's an interesting way of doing it. Star Citizen has all the ways of monetizing, and Dual Universe has gone and done away with most of those. There's so many things they cannot do because everything is player built. So I'm looking forward to see how they will survive.
Well, they have taken some of the interesting things EVE has for monetizing. They're slightly older ways anyway. The way EVE has in-game objects you can buy for and then trade in for real-world gaming time, so essentially monthly subscriptions. Dual Universe has a very similar model. They name it differently, and it at the very micro level behaves slightly differently, but essentially it's the same. You have in-game items that are translated to monthly subscriptions. So that kind of trading can happen. I guess it's not implausible for them to maybe take up a little share or commission about in-game sales from actually in-game money. And because you have these in-game items that are actually real-world money, that will eventually add up, and they could make some sort of money out of those very minute microtransactions. They do have monetization options here, and as you might have understood, this game, Dual Universe, is going to be based on monthly subscriptions, either paid or consumed with in-game items, but the money will be flowing in. They wouldn't have a problem there. It's quite similar to the EVE model, as I said.
Well, all I can do is wish them the best of luck. It looks like a really good game. I keep saying that, but this one, I like the whole freedom to build thing. But I'm not going to play it myself because, building things takes time.
Yeah, I'm a backer, and I think I'll have access to the beta version of the game. My main problem is that, like most modern games, I just lack anything close to the computer needed to run it.
Yeah, well, it probably won't come out on the PlayStation.
Not at first, although I think it does. It has the same problem many games have today. It's closely linked to DirectX and stuff, so it might not even leave Windows, but I might be completely misquoting that. I haven't read about their technicalities in a while.
Well, going from one, universe, or two of them in this case, to one that's, 50 years old. Although to some of us it's closer to 30 years. And yes, we're stepping away from games for a short bit, we're talking about TV, and those of us that have Netflix will have been watching StarTrek Discovery.
Yes, now, fair warning, if anybody hasn't watched episode 3 yet, you might want to stop listening now.
Ooh, are we planning on spoilering things?
Well, we might mention things by accident, just in conversation or rant or complaints. But fair warning, we might be mentioning things you have no idea what we're talking about.
Well, let's start with a quick recap. Where are we so far? What has happened?
Well, apparently we are in the same universe as Kirk and Picard, somewhere between them, I believe. So it's not the Jar Jar universe, it's not the Black Mirror universe, it's the regular universe the older listeners might know and love, and the younger ones might be going, huh? What are you talking about?
Actually, here's a slightly curious one. The show is set, and it differs a little bit where you look, 2055, 2056, so it's 9 or 10 years before Kirk, which means by necessity it's 9 or 10 years before the Jar Jar universe kicks in.
Actually, it would be about the same time as the Jar Jar universe, because Kirk went on his 5-year mission when he was already a captain, but the Jar Jar universe jumpstarts him into the Enterprise years before it was actually meant to happen.
Yeah, so it will be somewhere around the same time, let's put it that way. But you're right, the 5-year mission takes place in 2265, something like that. But Kirk started his little thing a little bit before that. So yeah, it's one of those, it's not quite in the Jar Jar universe. Sorry for people who don't like that we call it that way, but at the same time, can I just say, this is a Jar Jar Star Trek TV series.
Oh yeah, it most definitely, even though it is in the Prime timeline, that's the official name for it, it is most definitely not a typical Star Trek series. This is very much a modern action first, let's go in and blow stuff up because the audience likes it kind of show.
Yeah, but also if you look at it, in TOS, this is one of those things I know people don't like, but in the original series, TOS, Klingons had one look. In Enterprise, that look was explained. So the look that they have in 2265 comes back from 100 years before that, and this show takes place before that. It takes place in between the two, but here Klingons look nothing like Klingons ever did.
Or ever will after that, yes.
Yes. So it is very much somebody traveled back in time a little bit later than this TV series happens, and that caused Klingons to look differently. It's basically... apologies, but they've gone back and said, you know what, let's ignore Enterprise completely. Let's ignore the original series more or less. Let's ignore TNG, everything. This is a reboot TV series. It isn't a continuation lore-wise of anything.
Well, apparently they are going to be explaining all of these gaps. I find it hard to believe they will provide plausible explanations, but the writers have promised to explain why this series looks and behaves so differently to other parts of the universe that are really close to it timeline-wise. Now, we were saying about the Klingons, but it's not just the Klingons, but let's stick with the Klingons for now. It's not just the way they look, or their skulls, or facial ridges, or anything like that. These Klingons in Discovery, unlike the Klingons in any other series, seem to have a very different culture to the Klingons we know and love. They dress differently, their ships look completely different. It's like it's a completely different race that just happens to be called Klingons as well.
Well, there are a lot of similarities. They still have the whole armor thing, the whole militaristic thing. They still have these weird-ass ships where the bridge is on a long neck to the rest of the ship, as if the rest of the ship is toxic, and the bridge officers don't want to get anywhere near it.
Well, if you've seen Klingon food, that's not too much of an expectation.
Yeah, so they have a lot of these things that are still the same, but just completely different. And some of it I'm okay with. The whole putting your deaths on the outside of the ship so it looks a lot more bulky, that was unique to that one ship. The idea of the uniforms, well, guess what? Uniforms change. This just happened to be fashion, and it went away really quick for TOS.
Yeah, it went back to spandex. Surprisingly, everybody in the old series loved wearing spandex.
Well, okay, the original series was just weird dress-wise. TNG, at least, spandex was a thing.
Yeah, now let's talk about Starfleet. Somehow, their uniforms are nothing like Enterprise or the old series, even though they're in between them and extremely close to the old series. The ships, while they do sort of keep the Starfleet look, which is basically a dish and a couple of nacelles behind it for the warp drives, they're, apart from generally being on the same family of design, they look completely different. I don't think I've seen any ship so far that is familiar as a Starfleet model that we know from older series. It's again just disconnected, but trying to sort of share some traits.
Yeah, I can appreciate not wanting to look like the original series ships, wanting something slightly more modern. That I can appreciate, because they were ugly, and they were ugly for a reason. They were literally models, handmade. The Shenzhou, which, interesting enough, isn't the first spaceship on TV to be named that, and piloted, operated, commanded by a woman. That one looked fairly much like ships we would recognize, but, the Glenn and the Discovery are a lot further away from everything that we've seen. And size-wise, they're enormous. They're comparable to a Sovereign-class ship 100 years later.
Sovereign would be the Enterprise C, wouldn't it? Isn't that a Galaxy class?
Fairly sure they were Galaxy classes and then became Sovereign classes. Well, I might have that backwards.
Anyway, way too big.
Either way, it's in that size class. It's similar to the later Enterprises.
Yeah, but that sort of fits into the elements we all dislike from the Jar Jar universe, and they seem to be copied here just because they make good action scenes. The Enterprise in the Jar Jar universe, which is Kirk's Enterprise, this is the Enterprise NCC 1701 before it even had suffix letters to it. The original one was fairly smallish, but the one from the Jar Jar universe is, I think, twice its size. It's bigger than the Galaxy class, and that's just mad.
Yeah, it's just my takeaway from the visuals in this one is that it is definitely form over function. It is definitely about what looks nice, what is pretty, what is presentable, what is wow factor. A thing that about Jar Jar. And to be fair, he's not directly involved in this, but some of his disciples are. It's what he likes to do. Oh, look, it looks good. The hell with everything else. No. I appreciate Roddenberry was not big on continuity or lore. And it's a fact. He's said that directly. They would ignore things episode to episode. But if there's one thing the Star Trek fans have been kinda into, it is the whole lore, the whole setting, the whole what happens when and where. And all of a sudden we're, about 120 years before Voyager. And, spoiler alert, the Glenn has been to the Beta Quadrant.
Yeah, that surprised me in this last episode I watched. Didn't quite understand where that came from. Didn't quite understand where suddenly, and apologies for the spoiler again if you haven't watched, didn't quite understand where suddenly Starfleet has advanced research in organic-based technology. That seems completely out of any line we've seen so far. And it doesn't seem to have gone anywhere. The closest thing to it, you mentioned Voyager. The closest thing to organic technology I know in the Star Trek universe is Voyager having semi-organic based conduits. That's the closest thing to this I can even remember.
The Neorj gel packs.
Yes, those.
I found it interesting that, okay, we're getting into the spoiler territory here. The scientist talks about the muscles and sinews of the universe. Did you notice that one?
What you mean when he went on a tangent of semi-random words linked together, yes.
Good. Did you notice the name they used for describing, or the measurement for describing their displacement when they would go into whatever drive mechanics they're working on?
No, I don't think I did.
They refer to it as Spierine, Spierien.
Oh, is that when we was muttering about spores being physical space things that manipulate time or something?
More physics, but they manipulate space. But they talk over the comm with his counterpart on the USS Glenn, and the counterpart on the USS Glenn says, "Oh, we're going for Spierine 900," and he replies, "Wow, that is way too much displacement." And I latched on to that one because I thought that was a cute little thing. They're not complete idiots. Muscles in Dutch are called spieren. So literally they are referring to it as a user muscle, or muscling along the universe, as he puts it, the muscles and sinews of the universe.
Yeah, I guess I'm still waiting to see how they are going to explain this odd bit of technology, because what exists in that universe, and surprisingly in our actual universe, as we are seeing some recent developments in some space drive technology from NASA, they use warp drives, which essentially are things that bend space and allow a ship to surf a wave, which is, well, there's no easy way of explaining it, so I'll just say it in a silly way. As a lot of you might know, the highest speed anything can travel is the speed of light. But using these warp drives, they sort of create a wave that allows the ship to go faster than the speed of light while not actually going anything close to that speed. It's sort of like a surfer is barely moving while riding a really big wave. And that's pretty fast. That is, as far as we know from real-world physics, that's as fast as you can possibly go at the moment. But what they're saying in Discovery is that there's some sort of semi-biological way of, I don't know, linking all of the cells in the universe and allowing a ship to travel that way. I'm just not seeing much physics there.
No, but there's been a few before. Voyager encountered a being that was basically a space whale, and they had to mimic its movement and stuff. That could travel at warp speeds through some biological mechanism. And, the encounter at Farpoint 1, that had a city that was basically an alien that would fly again in space at warp speeds. So there is something already established in the universe that creatures can do this. But what they were displaying was, whoa, you just travel to Kronos instantaneously. It wasn't, you're warp speeding along. No, you're now there.
Oh, don't even start me about that demonstration they did at pretty much the last minute of the episode. That was not a ship drive, that was a teleporter device. And on top of that, the one thing I didn't get is if she was on a planet light years away, how was he still talking to her?
Yeah. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about Star Trek. As you can see, we have some qualms with the whole setting. But because of time constraints, and we do have a comic shop talk coming up, we're not going to get into the whole, everything else, because it is getting better. Every episode seems to be improving, but then opening up new questions. Hopefully, we'll be coming back and talking a little bit about the acting and the dialogues and the instructions, because that was painful, but it's getting better.
Yeah. Did you know the one thing I enjoyed about this episode of Discovery that I think no other series of Star Trek has ever had? Their shuttle had an airlock.
That is true. They never used double-doored airlocks.
Yeah, this was the first ship I've ever seen in a Star Trek universe that had an airlock, which was really nice for a change. It's finally not just a door that opens up into an alien atmosphere that could kill you.
Yeah, they needed it. Okay, sorry, we have to cut it there, guys. As you can hear, Grit and I could talk for ages about this, and we might do that offline, but pray that we don't do it online, or that we do. Either way.
Yeah. Or if you have any opinion about this and you want us to talk about the Discovery episode every week, just leave a comment, let us know. We'll be happy to complain all day long.
Either way, this has been G talking about a bit of news, bit of Kickstarter, bit of games, bit of Star Trek.
And this has been good, coming back to fill in for a slightly missing Bam, as we said before. And I hope you enjoy Draconis and his comic shop talk.
The Bamps has rated our show. Like, comment, and subscribe. Do it. Bacon commands you.
Hey folks, welcome back to our October 2017 edition of Comic Shop Talk. I am Draconis, and I am joined today once again with my buddy TJ.
Where's Rachel? Oh, hey guys, how are you? Thanks for tuning in.
You know, I'll probably have to do like a bloopers at the end where I include all your other stuff you were goofing around with at the beginning.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's not a goofy Batman voice. That is a very serious Batman voice. Swear to me.
I was just going to say, would I swear? Or would you swear?
I don't wear hockey pads. How's it going, guys? Thanks for tuning in. So should we get started?
Yeah, let's jump into it.
All right, so I guess the first thing I'll lead into this one because I'm pretty stoked about this myself. So anybody who regularly listens, you know, two of the things that I love the most, I love comic books, obviously, but I love pro wrestling. And I love pro wrestling because growing up to me, it was a live action comic book. So it's just superheroes versus supervillains, and it was always really cool.
That's funny. I never got that from that.
Really?
I used to watch it myself too.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember I'd go to my grandmother's like during the summers and like visit with them for a few weeks. And I took my G.I. Joes and I took like a cardboard box with some pencils and some rubber bands.
Yeah.
And made my own like little wrestling arena where I'd fling the figures at each other and stuff. I never got the superhero thing from it.
Oh, yeah.
Hearing it described that way, it makes sense. But
Well,
yeah.
you know, you got a bunch of, you know, really strong, powerful men and women in tights fighting each other over, you know, ideology. That's really all pro wrestling is. So, but the thing is, there's never really ever been a good wrestling comic. You know, Marvel did a WCW comic in the 90s, and Chaos Comics in the mid to late 90s did some really cool stuff during the WWE's Attitude Era, where like The Undertaker was the Warden of Hell in Lady Death. So like that stuff was always kind of neat, but not until recently, over the last year, has there ever been a good wrestling comic, at least in terms of licensed wrestling, I should say, like Boom's WWE comic that they've been doing for about the past year now. It's really, and my bias totally aside, it's just been such a cool, out of control comic because they've taken all these really great writers and artists in comics, and I mean like people like Dennis Hopeless and Rob Guillory and Ed McGuinness, really big names in comics who are big pro wrestling fans. Eric Powell from The Goon has done a bunch of covers. Dan Mora from Power Rangers has done just outstanding art in it. But what they do is they take all these big story arcs from Monday Night Raw and Tuesday SmackDown Live, and they go in depth with them in the comics. So like the first story arc was all about the breakup of the Shield and what Seth Rollins was conspiring with Triple H and all that. And I might be speaking Greek to some of you, and I apologize. But the point of this is that former WWE champion AJ Styles, who is easily one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, is going to be co-writing the upcoming Boom WWE Royal Rumble 2018 special. It's going to be an oversized issue that goes into the history of the Royal Rumble, which is one of the 4 big pay-per-views of the year, and it's always the most fun because you never know who's going to show up. But the cool thing is Michael Kingston, who's the co-writer of a really great wrestling comic called Headlocked, and he's worked with a bunch of people in wrestling on that, between Mick Foley and Christian of the greatest tag team of all time, Edge and Christian. They're going to be doing this together, and it's going to be about AJ Styles' point of view of his debut at the WWE when he entered the Royal Rumble in 2016. It was super, super cool. It's one of the greatest moments of all time because he's just one of those big name wrestlers who never made it to the WWE. So the fact that he's nearly pushing 40, is working like a 25-year-old, and is so relevant that he's getting to co-write this comic about him, I'm super jazzed on it. It's just, this is going to be a lot of fun.
Best wrestling team up of all time, huh?
Best wrestling tag team of all time, Edge and Christian.
I don't know. I think they'd probably get a lot of arguments on that.
Oh, I'm sure.
Didn't Stone Cold and The Rock team up at some point or something like that?
No, it
was kind of after my time. But...
They no, not as tag team champions.
Okay.
However, the Rock and Sock connection, Rock and Mick Foley, Mankind were, and then Stone Cold Steve Austin and Dude Love, which is Stone Cold and Mick Foley, they were tag team partners together. But those are two guys who are put together. But then there's the idea of the tag team, you know, the Hart Foundation, the Rockers.
Well, the Hart Foundation,
you know, Bret Hart's my all-time favorite wrestler. But as a tag team, Edge and Christian to me were the guys who redefined tag team wrestling. Like that group of guys in like the late '90s, early 2000s, Edge and Christian, the Dudley Boys, the Hardy Boys, the New Age Outlaws, Too Cool, teams like that. So it's always really cool to see that. Pro wrestling has really changed its outlook on the way they do things. It used to be very much that oversized tough guy mentality and then kind of the good old boy mentality. But now we've gotten to this point where a lot of the big wrestlers, because they're all in their early 20s to late 30s, maybe pushing early 40s, they're all the ones who grew up as wrestling nerds. So they grew up playing the wrestling video games and buying the wrestling toys and never missing an episode of Monday Night Raw or Monday Nitro and all of that. So now they're nerds as adults who are bringing what they loved about wrestling and other things they may be into, whether it's music, video games, comic books, whatever, into what they do on screen and in the ring. So it's really kind of a changed atmosphere, a changed mentality now. So it's really neat to see how they can take all of their personal nerdiness and make it a part of who they are in the ring.
Well, and that's one of the great things about this kind of thing is, you know, with this, how many years this has been around and people getting involved in that. Because, I mean, every single person has done it. You're a fan of something, you really enjoy it, and then you get this great idea like, oh man, it'd be awesome if they did this, or if they did that differently. Now, you know, being someone who's working in the industry for these guys, they get an opportunity to do some of those things that they maybe always dreamed of doing and then bringing that to the audiences. Yeah, no, that's cool.
So yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's really neat to see that more people are willing to see that convergence of pro wrestling and comic book, because really at the end of the day, it is all the same stuff. And it's, you know, I mean, how many of these guys and gals grew up watching wrestling and reading comics and saying, I can do that. And now, not only do they get to do that in the ring on a nightly basis, but now you've got a bunch of them getting to do it within comic books. Like, that's awesome. And, you know, they all get stoked out seeing themselves as video games and action figures. Why shouldn't they be excited not just to see themselves as a comic book character, but to get to write themselves as a comic book character with a seasoned comic book writer? That's really cool.
Well, and we've mentioned this before, but I mean, you can describe a little bit of that feeling of what it's like for yourself to show up in a comic.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like that.
So it's exciting, and it's always that thing that's really surreal, but it's also it's a testament to the art form. You know, it doesn't matter what I am in real life. You know, I get to do something really cool, like in the Turtles comic, and you know, I got a friend of mine that I used to work with. She's one of the Krang. She's one of the Utrom in our Turtles comic. Then another guy I work with, he's essentially Mondo Gecko in our Turtles comic. So it's really neat to see that all of us get to live our dream in some way, shape, or form. That's really exciting.
Yeah, that's super cool.
So yeah, I gotta say it, man. You know, kudos to the phenomenal one, AJ Styles.
I guess we'll move on to the next thing here. We got IDW Publishing coming out with 30 Days of Night.
Yep, a new 30 Days of Night series coming, so that'll be cool. That's Steve Niles obviously writing that, who co-created 30 Days of Night. And 30 Days of Night's hitting its 15th anniversary this year, so this is going to be super rad. 30 Days was probably the first really big breakout hit for IDW as a publisher. It didn't do crazy numbers as a comic book, but there was a bidding war for the rights to the comic to turn into a movie, and when people saw that studios were fighting over who was going to get it, that generated interest in the comic book, which was super cool. And then, of course, you know, eventually you get the amazing 30 Days a Night film directed by Sam Raimi, starring Josh Hartnett, and it's one of those things that really kind of put IDW outside of comics in a place where people are like, oh wow, they put out cool stuff, they put out stuff of value, and that's where the balance of doing licensed comics and creator-owned comics comes in, because, you know, at that point, when 30 Days a Night debuted, the two comics we were doing were 30 Days a Night, which was creator-owned, and CSI, which was our first licensed title. And without CSI, I mean, we wouldn't have gotten Star Trek eventually, and, you know, more and more and more coming out of that, because they saw how IDW could handle licensed material. So it's really cool to see 30 Days a Night still has such a fan following. It's still so loved by horror fans. And definitely, I mean, my personal opinion, between 30 Days a Night, Lock and Key, and The Walking Dead, those are the three biggest horror comic franchises in the last, you know, 15 years. So it's...
Oh, man. And I just finished, like a couple weeks ago, reading Lock and Key.
Amazing,
It was amazing. I loved it.
Yeah, keep your eyes peeled for more with Lock and Key for sure. But I will say this, because it's going to be a cheap plug in the style of Mick Foley talking about wrestling earlier. At the San Diego Comic Art Gallery for the month of October going into November, we're going to be doing a 30 Days a Night exhibit in the gallery. We're going to have a bunch of Ben Templesmith's artwork in there. We're going to do a night where Steve Niles comes in for a Q&A with the fans. We're really going to kind of celebrate what 30 Days a Night has done for comics and for IDW and for horror. So it's going to be super cool.
Well, now, so this is a new series or a new story?
Yeah.
How many, because I honestly don't know, how many different series have been out at this point?
There have been 7 or 8 of them.
7 or 8? Okay.
My count might be off a little bit, but yeah, there's been a lot. And we just did a trade paperback that collects the first 3 series. Okay. So, yeah, it's super cool. And there's an exclusive version at the gallery, just saying. So, cheap plug. But, yeah, it's really cool to see that horror comics still have such a great audience, especially with the accessibility to horror films and short horror films on YouTube and on Shudder and all these other different services where, you know, young horror directors can put out all the stuff that they want. It's great to see that horror comics still have such a place on the racks. So that's very cool.
Okay, well, and something else that kind of caught my eye, because, man, I don't think I have really heard this name other than when occasionally we bring up old cartoons that we loved from the 80s.
Sure.
But Transformers vs. the Visionaries.
Super stoked. That is going to be, that's going to be super, super cool. It's going to be another Hasbro property being introduced to the Hasbro universe at IDW Publishing. There have been hints here and there of the Visionaries. There was a really cool hint, if you didn't catch it, I think in Revolutionaries issue 3, which was the team up between Soundwave and the 1960s G.I. Joe adventure team, which is essentially the G.I. Joe with Kung Fu grip G.I. Joe, Joe Colton, him and his team. But we did this really cool thing where his team wasn't just the classic 60s G.I. Joe allies, but there was also Stalker from G.I. Joe, A Real American Hero, and Miles Mayhem from Mask. So it was kind of cool to see all that come together in that way with Soundwave there. But there's, I think, 1 or 2 hints to Visionaries in that issue before we even announced Visionaries. But it's going to be a lot of fun to have those two come together, especially because Transformers, there's a lot more mysticism in Transformers than most people realize, considering, you know, it's sentient robots who can think and feel, as the first episode said. But, you know, this idea that they have souls, that they have, you know, their spark, that's their soul, and, you know, the matrix of leadership and the key to Vector Sigma, all this stuff is so mystic and so kind of so much more grandiose than you would expect for Transformers. So Visionaries, being that really cool mix of science and magic, is gonna be such a cool fit for that.
Oh, so they would fit within the last Transformers movie with the Arthurian legend and...
No.
God, that movie pissed me off so much.
I'm going to be nice. But it's going to be really cool. I mean, the magic hologram technology and all that was super cool when I was a kid. And
that was one of the greatest things about those toys.
Yeah, the Neorj figure was so cool. Oh, yeah. So it's going to be neat to see how it all comes together. And Magdalene Visaggio is the writer on it, and Fico Ossio, who drew Revolution for us, the crossover that brought the Hasbro universe together, he's going to be the artist on that. So, I mean, that dude can draw his butt off. So it's going to be a lot of fun to see those two properties come together essentially for the first time. Like, not even in 30 years, but ever. So...
Do we think there's any chance, I know this is probably kind of a silly thing, but any chance there might be any actual holograms in the comics, either not necessarily part of the story?
This isn't the 90s. holograms in comics. What do you want next, Chrome?
Well, hell yeah, and some of them.
Man.
Can you imagine a Chrome Transformers book? That would be amazing. I'm sure there probably
I
were
can
some
remember
like
a Chrome Transformers book. Marvel did them. Absolutely. But no, it's going to be a lot of fun, and the Hasbro Universe stuff is so cool, and it all it really is just, you know, all of us as, you know, little boys and girls sitting on our carpets and playing out these team-ups as a kid, even as a 7-year-old, the size indifference on the scale of the figures made me insane. Even as a kid, I was bad about scale. But yeah, it's gonna be awesome, and I'm really excited to see how all of it really plays out. Just because, again, the Hasbro Universe stuff is so cool.
Well, and you know, speaking of Hasbro,
Mm-hmm.
I have to mention this.
For sure.
I've got a 9-year-old, and she has been totally into this series for a long time now. She loves the comics, she loves the cartoons, and I guess I kind of maybe should admit to this, is I've actually watched some of the cartoons with her, and surprisingly, actually, they're really not that bad. And it doesn't. Yes, it is targeted more towards girls, I think, just in the material that it is. But it's still, you know, like when we were kids, a lot of times cartoons had a good message.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of cartoons, that's missing.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't seem to be missing from My Little Pony.
Well, everything about My Little Pony is the message.
And that's the amazing thing. Yeah,
it's not just the last 30 seconds before the episode is over. Everything about it is exactly what the title is. My Little Pony, like straight up, that and Turtles are probably the two most popular comics that we publish at IDW. And I'm not a My Little Pony person, but man, like, it's fun and it's funny. And I'm saying that, and I'm thinking I might be a My Little Pony person. But my girlfriend's niece absolutely adores it, so I give her comic books all the time. But it's cool, though, because you will never find a group of comic creators, writers, and artists who love what they do nearly as much as the My Little Pony creative teams do. They're all fabulously talented. They're all super cool. They're all good people, and it's clear that they love the material, and they're happy that the people who read the comics love them as much as they love making them. And the same can be said for the cartoon, obviously. I mean, it's so obvious, you know, Lauren Faust from Powerpuff Girls and Foster's Home from Imaginary Friends, and then was it Super Best Friends Forever from DC. It's clear that when she developed this new My Little Pony for Hasbro, what she was bringing to the table. And it's so cool that there's something for everybody in there, to the point where they're constantly, not just in the cartoon, but in our comics, most of the creative teams are hiding in jokes for adult viewers and like references here and there, and nothing inappropriate, but just jokes that kids aren't going to get. And to me, that's one of those things that I think is a strength to the show. But to the whole point of it's aimed towards girls, certainly My Little Pony since the 80s has been considered a girl's brand, but I think it's really cool that we're getting to a point where not everything necessarily needs to be gender specific, where this is for girls and this is for boys. Like, I love the idea that my girlfriend's niece loves My Little Pony, but she also loves Transformers and the Turtles, and, you know, Rey from Star Wars is her hero and all that. And at the same time, I get little boys who come into the gallery who are so excited to see our My Little Pony stuff in there. So it's neat, because when you're a kid, the choices that you make for the things that you gravitate towards, or the things you are into, those are the first independent choices that you're making. Right. And as the parent, it's your job to foster that independent choice, because that instills a confidence in the choices that they're going to make in the future. So it doesn't matter if you're the parent who doesn't like that that your boy wants to watch My Little Pony, or your girl wants to watch Star Wars. Watch it with them. Foster that choice.
I remember there was a while ago that I saw, we went to a movie theater and I was taking...
Not to get too, you know, social and political and all that there, but just a personal thing.
Yeah, there was a while ago I took my little one to see a movie, and it's sitting in the window for the theater, and this was before Deadpool came out, long before it was even made, but it's funny. It was one of the My Little Pony, like, larger figures.
Yeah.
And I think it might have been... Now here's the hilarious thing, right? So I have one of her uncles calls me up and is asking about what to get her, and like they're looking at My Little Pony stuff. Which ones does she already have? And I start rattling off names.
Sure.
And he just starts busting up laughing on the phone because I know the names of these characters. But so anyway, in the window at this movie theater, there was a Princess Celestia, which is like a unicorn that has wings, and she's like the princess leader. The Unisys, though, right? Because it still has a unicorn on it.
That's right. Yes. See?
But anyway, so that figure is sitting there, and riding that figure is Deadpool, and it was hilarious. And like I took a picture of it and I posted it up, and I was like, this more or less kind of describes, you know, the way in which I'm trying to foster her interest in things. Like she discovers things.
That's you as a dad.
I show her things that I'm interested in. We try to mesh them together. So.
But you see, and that's, to me, that's something that says a lot about where we're going as a society and as guardians and as parents and all that. But I really think My Little Pony has fostered more of that approach to guardianship and parenthood and mentorship than most people realize. Because what's the matter with, you know, a boy watching it? If they're getting what that message on that show is, or that show is making them laugh or smile, or that toy is giving them whatever adventure in their head that they're having, have at it. Dude, like, that's awesome.
When I was growing up, I watched things like She-Ra and Jem.
Totally. Absolutely. But you've seen at my place. My She-Ra figures are right there next to my He-Man figures in the big wall units.
Yeah, I mean, She-Ra was an extension of the He-Man universe.
Absolutely.
I was into it. I don't remember. I think Jem probably came on at a time, like, in between other things I was watching. I watched it because I love cartoons.
Sure.
And
the music was catchy.
Yeah, it was. I mean, you have to say that about a lot of 80s cartoons.
For sure. Hey, I still want the Misfits from Jem and the Holograms to go on tour with Cold Slither from G.I. Joe. So, you know, one day I'll get that tour. But yeah, I do think that there's a lot of value to it. So I'm excited about everything that's going to come out of the My Little Pony movie. I think it's going to be really cool to see that brand on the big screen in a way that none of the other Hasbro stuff has been on the big screen. It is very much true to the core of what it is. It's not, here's this live action version of My Little Pony, which kind of loses the foundation of what it is. It very much gets to be in its true element of fantasy and excitement and adventure and all that, in a way that both G.I. Joe and Transformers kind of gets lost in translation with. So I think this is going to be good for the brand, and it's going to be good for the fans.
I should bite my tongue, but I can't.
Why?
So Michael Bay isn't going to direct the My Little Pony movie with lots of explosions and completely different storyline.
Hey, there's a really great saying, and I guess I'll relate this to Michael Bay and Zack Snyder, and that nobody ever went broke underestimating the taste of the American public. Speaking of that, let's move on to Justice League.
Oh, God. Nice segue, by the way.
Thank you. Do you want to take this and then I'll talk?
There was an article online we found that was talking about some of the early reviews for Justice League, and they're actually kind of positive, even from people who had seen Man of Steel or Suicide Squad, did not like those movies.
Or Batman vs. Superman.
Well, yeah.
No.
You want to do the Batman voice again?
No, because the Affleck voice is different.
That's
true.
True.
I can't do the Affleck voice.
Yeah, it's a little kind of a electronic gravelly type.
I don't know. I just, still think of that asshole from The Fashionable Male when I think of Ben Affleck. Yeah, that's right, a Clerks reference. But no, it's interesting, I guess, because I did not. Anybody who knows me knows I didn't like Man of Steel, and I didn't like Batman vs Superman, and I didn't like Suicide Squad. And I'm not going to sit here and rail them or anything like that. You can find everybody everywhere on the internet doing that. I want to like them because, again, as you guys have heard me say before, I love the DC universe. I absolutely adore those characters. 3 of them are tattooed on me. The DC universe is really special to me, so I don't want to sit there and bash it. I'm disappointed that I don't like these adaptations the way I should, but also I'm of the mindset that starting out having Batman and Superman fighting each other for the first time you see them on screen together, not a smart move.
No.
But at any rate,
I had so many family members on my wife's side and everything that were going, why are these two fighting?
Exactly.
It didn't make any sense.
Mm-hmm. They want to tell you that there was context to them fighting, but there wasn't, and it was unfortunate.
Well, a lot of the supporters of that will say, "Oh, they fought X amount of times in the comics," but
yeah, but there's years and years and years of a relationship between Batman and Superman
that built to that.
That You know, and 9 times out of 10, the fights that Batman and Superman have in the comics are a misunderstanding of what is essentially the same ideology. So it's...
Well, a lot of the stuff I've seen, too, in the comics, at least from what I've seen, I've always been on Batman's side of it, because it's Superman being, like, mind-controlled or affected by red kryptonite or
so then that's something. That's not Superman being the bad guy.
Right, and that's why I've been on Batman's side of things. But in the movie, this was kind of strange for me, because it was for the first time I have ever been on Superman's side of the two of them actually coming to, like, blows.
But the reason is because Superman wasn't a victim.
Right, he wasn't.
Every time you've been on Batman's side, it's not because Superman is doing something wrong. It's because Superman is being forced to do something wrong. Right. Superman is being made the weapon rather than, you know, Superman being Superman. And all Batman vs. Superman served to do was make Batman one of the things that I hate that he's become in the last 15, 20 years, and that's this paranoid aggressor. We've talked about it before. I'm of the mindset that everything Batman does, everything Bruce does as Batman, is out of an undying supply of compassion for his fellow man and to ensure that nobody ever hurts the way he did ever again. And the moment you take that part of Batman away, he just becomes a psychopath in a mask, and there's nothing compelling or exciting about that in any way. It doesn't make him cool or edgy. It makes him a guy who loses his humanity, and I don't want Batman to be that guy. So with that said, talking about humanity, Wonder Woman really redeems the DC extended universe. So hearing people say, quote, that Justice League was epic is really exciting, especially from people who didn't like the previous movies before Wonder Woman. But with that said, I am going in cautiously optimistic. This will be only the second DC film I see on screen, because the first one I saw in the big screen was Wonder Woman, because I just didn't want to pay for the others, so I just waited till, you know, I could watch them at home. But I really, 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 really want to like this. Everything I've seen has been rough. I'm not sold on Aqua Bro.
I gotta say, and I think I've probably even said this on the show before, as much as I'm such on the fence with Aquaman, because of the fact that I really want movies to represent the characters from the comics as closely as possible as they are in the comics.
Sure.
Yet, the redesign that they have done with Aquaman, to me, feels really a really great design for
it's
the
not
character.
A heavy redesign. A lot of it is pulled from Aquaman in the 1993-94 Peter David run. So it's not heavily far from who the character is in the comics. I mean, sure, he doesn't have blonde hair, but, you know, bearded warrior Aquaman minus the harpoon hand is totally what you have on screen there.
Well, when do you think we'll get that?
I would love to see it, but before that, I kind of want them to stop having Aquaman prove he's a badass. I want Aquaman to stop proving he's a badass by downing a bottle of Jack Daniels and diving into the ocean, and have him ride away on a giant whale, because that's more badass. But the problem that I have is he's not Aquaman, he's Aqua Momoa. He just feels like he's playing himself. So
last episode it was 50 Shades of Wayne, this one it's Aqua Momoa. We're just coining all new terms.
I'm a little concerned with Flash. Every time they bring Barry to the big screen, they just give him Wally West's personality, and Wally is my favorite Flash, but if you're going to do that, just give me Wally West. So that's...
Maybe have Barry Allen play a backseat where he's kind of a mentor, and then...
Have Barry be dead.
Oh.
You know, we've already shown that there's a dead Robin. Clearly it's Jason Todd. Dick is easily Nightwing at this point. Why wouldn't Wally not be Kid Flash anymore and be the Flash? You know?
Makes sense.
So it's that sort of thing. But the thing I am most concerned about is the flat delivery of Ray Fisher as Cyborg. We've only seen him in like 2 vocal scenes in the trailer, and there's like no life in his voice.
Well, you know, okay, I kind of feel... I don't know that you can blame the actor as much for that. Well, first of all, we've talked a little bit about this before, where, you know, we've seen so little, it's really difficult to judge at this point. But with regards to, if all of the dialogue is that way, I ended up, in another episode, I think I was talking to, it was either Jolly or Bam, about Dinklebot, which was Peter Dinklage So you're getting the little giggles like I do when you say Dick for Dick Grayson. It's hilarious. But when Peter Dinklage did the voice for this tiny little cube android that follows, or not android, but robot that follows around with you in Destiny games, there were so many people that were just like losing their crap about like a flat robotic delivery, and it's like, well, it's a robot, I know.
But Cyborg's not.
Well, but I know. Yes, there's a human component to it, but there's not much human left.
Not at all.
So
there's not much human body left. It doesn't mean that there's not much of him left.
But there is an argument that when you replace all of that stuff, just like with RoboCop, yes, he still had a personality, he still had memories, but when you replace so much physical mass with robotic components that are plugged into the brain, how much of your humanity may go away, how much,
We got stories like that with Cyborg in the early 90s when Cyborg was being used by the Hive, the enemies of the Titans, against the Titans. But when Cyborg first debuted and he had all of his cybernetic parts on him, it was him angry. And it wasn't Marv Wolfman, who created Cyborg. His whole thing was not to do the angry black young man with Cyborg. It was a real anger, and it came out of a frustration over, I'm not a man anymore. I'm a freak, I'm a monster, and my dad did this to me, and this, that, and the other thing. And there was always this really, this anger that Vic had, nearly like if he was alone, to the verge of tears, because of what he looks like. And there's so much that you can do with that character today, with the political world that we live in, the social world that we live in. For Vic, it's hard enough being a young black American. Now he looks the way he looks, and people are even more afraid of him on sight than, unfortunately, some would be to begin with. And there's a lot of real emotional content for a character like Victor Stone. And it just, again, it's only 2 scenes, but it doesn't even feel like anything other than just like, I'll take care of this, Alfred. It sounds like Harry Spears doing his Shaq impression on Mad TV in the 90s. So I'm just kind of like...
And part of that, of what I was getting at too, is, I think that the direction that they get from the director, on how the director wants to portray that character and how the
Sure.
It is probably more to blame. And that's the same thing I go back to with Dinklebot. He was given a set of instructions, and he acted out to those instructions. So yeah, we've only seen these 2 little clips, and they've been minor little clips. Hopefully, at some point, we see a little bit more. Maybe we wait for the movie. That's fine.
Sure.
Maybe this is the first time he's out as Cyborg, and it looked like, at least from the clips that you see in Man of Steel, or no, sorry, not Man of Steel, Batman vs Superman, that he'd only just been created. Or at least I didn't catch the context into how long that video had been around. So maybe he's still dealing with those things. Maybe his personality as Cyborg is still developing.
I hope so. I'm going to say what I always say, though, in regards to Cyborg on the Justice League. First, let me say, I love Cyborg. Anybody who knows my love of DC knows that I'm a huge Titans nerd. Cyborg is just taking Martian Manhunter's spot.
Right.
And that bums me out. But that's also because I have the greatest Martian Manhunter story that no one's ever read yet. So, but I love Cyborg, and I'm glad that he's on the big screen. It's a long time coming for that character. I would have put Martian Manhunter in that spot and saved Cyborg for the Titans, and then have him eventually graduate to the Justice League, which I think would be really cool. But again, I'm not the one making this movie, because if I were, it'd be awesome.
And on that note, I think we're going to cut it off for this week. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, stuck around with us. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave those for us. As always, like, share, subscribe, all those fun things. TJ, have you got anything to say to anybody before we get out of here?
Thanks for listening, and thanks for letting us rant.
And
swear to me, I don't wear hockey pads. Where's Rachel?